In the middle of the jungle, far from roads, cities and official controls, there are hidden facilities where the coca leaf enters as raw material and leaves converted into an illegal commodity that moves fortunes. But behind this process, there is not just chemistry, there is deforestation, stolen fuel, trapped communities and organized violence. The history of cocaine begins with a plant that for thousands of years had a cultural, medicinal and ritual use in Andean regions. The coca leaf was used by indigenous communities to endure fatigue, hunger, altitude and long working days in mountain environments. In that traditional context, the plant did not signify drug trafficking by itself. It was part of an ancient relationship between territory, culture and survival. The problem appeared when that plant was absorbed by a global illegal economy. What was once a leaf with local uses ended up converted into the base of a transnational clandestine industry. This transformation completely changed the meaning of its cultivation. It was no longer just about agriculture, but about an economic chain controlled by armed groups, criminal networks, intermediaries, buyers, transporters and organizations capable of moving money, fuel, weapons and people on a large scale. In many producing areas, coca cultivation does not thrive solely by the individual decision of farmers. It grows because structural conditions exist that favor it. The absence of the state, a lack of legal roads, rural poverty, low profitability of alternative crops, pressure from armed groups, and the presence of buyers who pay in cash. For many families, coca appears as an immediate economic escape in regions where other agricultural products have no market, transport, or sufficient price. This reality makes the phenomenon more complex. It cannot be reduced to a simple image of rural criminality. In the first link, there are farmers, harvesters, and workers who often live between necessity, pressure, and fear. Some participate because they have no other stable source of income. Others do it because the territory is under the control of armed actors. Others remain trapped in an economy where refusing also implies risks. Large crops are usually located in areas of difficult access, dense jungles, mountains, remote valleys, porous borders, and regions where institutional presence is weak. This geography is not accidental. The distance protects the activity. The vegetation hides paths, camps, and laboratories. The rivers allow for the movement of cargo. The lack of surveillance facilitates the installation of processing centers. The isolation, which for a rural community usually means abandonment, for organized crime means opportunity. When the leaves are collected, a second stage begins, the transfer toward clandestine processing points. There, the production ceases to look like an agricultural activity and becomes an illegal industrial operation. These are not clean, controlled, or specialized laboratories in the formal sense of the word. They are improvised, dangerous, polluting facilities designed to produce fast, hide fast, and be dismantled if there is a risk of intervention. These places may be covered with plastics, wood, precarious roofs, tanks, barrels, and rudimentary filtering systems. They operate far from safety, hygiene, or environmental protection standards. The people who work there handle dangerous substances without real guarantees. There are no legitimate industrial protocols, no sanitary control, no labor protection, and no environmental responsibility. Everything is organized around a single priority: producing an illegal commodity before the laboratory is discovered. Gasoline enters this chain because criminal groups need solvents and industrial fuels to process large quantities of plant matter. In a clandestine laboratory, these liquids are not used in safe conditions, but in environments where any error can cause poisoning, fires, explosions, or contamination of soil and rivers. Fuel thus becomes another piece of the illegal gear, not only for its function within processing, but for the way it is obtained. In some regions, the supply of gasoline and other petroleum derivatives is linked to theft, smuggling, or the diversion of legal supplies. Criminal organizations need large volumes, and to get them, they create parallel transport networks. They may use hidden paths, pack animals, boats, modified trucks, or clandestine depots. Every liter mobilized feeds a chain that produces not only drugs, but also corruption, violence, and institutional deterioration. Stolen or diverted fuel also generates another problem. It affects legal economies. When pipelines are punctured, clandestine connections are manipulated, or flammable liquids are transported without control, enormous risks are created for nearby communities. A spill can contaminate water and soil, a leak can cause fires, an explosion can destroy homes, kill people, and leave permanent damage. What seems like a simple industrial input ends up converted into a public threat. Cocaine begins long before the laboratory. It starts in areas where poverty, geography, illegality, and state absence cross. It starts when a traditional plant is trapped in a criminal economy. It starts when fuel, chemicals, and clandestine logistics penetrate entire regions and reorganize local life around fear, necessity, and fast money. A clandestine mega-laboratory does not function like a conventional factory, although it can handle enormous volumes. It has no permits, safety standards, certified ventilation systems, waste treatment, or personnel protected by labor rights. Its scale may be industrial, but its logic is criminal. Everything is designed to transform raw material into an illegal commodity with speed, concealment, and minimal traceability. The word mega-laboratory may give a sophisticated image, but it often involves an accumulation of precarious structures. Leaf reception areas, mixing zones, plastic or metal containers, fuel depots, drying spaces, packaging points, and exit routes. There may be electrical generators, motor pumps, improvised kitchens, rudimentary ovens, tents, temporary dormitories, and armed surveillance. The whole forms a clandestine production facility that can be moved, abandoned, or rebuilt at another point if police pressure increases. The operation is organized by functions. Some people receive and prepare the plant matter. Others transport fuel and industrial substances. Others watch the perimeter. Others coordinate the exit of the intermediate product toward refinement laboratories. There are also operators with practical knowledge of the mixtures, known in many places as cooks. They are not necessarily university-trained chemists. Many times they learned through criminal transmission, empirical repetition, and experience within illegal networks. This informality makes the process extremely dangerous. In a legal industry, solvents, acids, bases, and fuels are handled under strict standards. In a clandestine laboratory, those rules disappear. Workers can be exposed to toxic vapors, burns, poisonings, respiratory injuries, and fire accidents. Gasoline and other flammable liquids increase the risk of fires, especially when stored in inadequate containers near heat, improvised cables, or poorly ventilated spaces. Furthermore, contamination is constant. The liquid waste from these operations usually ends up in the soil, streams, rivers, or improvised wells. There are no treatment plants, no controlled neutralization, no environmental monitoring. Chemical waste is discharged wherever it is easiest to hide. In jungle areas, this means that corrosive substances, fuels, and contaminated organic remains can seep into fragile ecosystems. The damage is not limited to the exact point of the laboratory. A contaminated river can affect downstream communities. Fish can die or accumulate harmful substances. Animals can drink contaminated water. The soil can lose fertility. Vegetation can degrade. When these facilities multiply in a region, the environmental impact ceases to be local and becomes a form of sustained territorial degradation. There is also deforestation. To install crops, camps, hidden paths, and laboratories, clearings are opened in the jungle. Logging allows for sowing, moving cargo, and creating landing or transit zones. Every intervened hectare changes the balance of the ecosystem. Trees are lost, habitats are fragmented, species are displaced, and the entry of more illegal activities is facilitated. Drug trafficking does not only extract money from the drug, it also extracts stability from nature. The mega laboratory functions as the physical center of an economy that needs to hide but also to connect. It must be far from surveillance but near exit routes. It must be invisible from the air but accessible for those transporting inputs. It must handle large volumes but be able to be abandoned quickly. That contradiction defines its design. This is why they are usually located in intermediate zones, hidden enough to avoid controls, but not so isolated as to prevent the movement of cargo. Armed security is another key piece. These centers do not survive solely by being hidden. They survive because they are part of territories controlled or disputed by criminal groups. Surveillance may include informants, radios, weapons, observation posts, and escape routes. In some areas, the local community lives under direct threat. Anyone who speaks out, denounces, or refuses to collaborate can face retaliation. Thus, the laboratory is not just a place of production, it is a point of power. That power also corrupts. To move fuel, chemicals, food, weapons, money, and illegal products, the networks need contacts. They can pressure officials, infiltrate trade routes, forge documents, bribe controls, or use front companies. The clandestine chain mixes with sectors of the legal economy. A truck may carry apparently normal cargo and hide inputs. A farm may look agricultural and function as a collection point. A business may sell legal products that end up diverted toward laboratories. Illegal production, then, does not depend only on chemistry. It depends on logistics. It depends on routes. It depends on silence. It depends on corruption. It depends on fear. And it also depends on an international demand that sustains the business. As long as there are markets willing to pay high prices for cocaine, there will be organizations looking for new ways to produce, move, and sell it. The end consumer usually sees only the product. They do not see the logged jungle, the stolen fuel, the waste thrown into the river, the exploited workers, the threats to farmers, the displaced communities, nor the corrupted officials. They do not see the hidden laboratory or the risks taken by those who handle dangerous substances without protection. They do not see that every illegal gram drags a chain of violence much larger than the act of consumption. When the product leaves a clandestine laboratory, the story does not end. Another equally complex phase begins: transport, concealment, distribution, and money laundering. Cocaine produced in remote areas has no real value until it manages to cross routes, borders, and oceans. For this reason, criminal organizations invest as much in logistics as in production. The drug does not move alone, it moves with networks. First, internal transfers appear. From jungle or mountainous regions, the illegal commodity can travel toward collection centers, secondary laboratories, clandestine airstrips, navigable rivers, or coastal zones. Every route has risks. Criminal groups use rural paths, speedboats, small vessels, modified vehicles, agricultural cargo, hidden compartments, or fragmented routes to reduce the possibility of seizure. The key is to divide the movement into sections and prevent a single capture from revealing the entire chain. In some cases, the product moves toward commercial ports. There, it mixes with the legal economy. Containers, fruit shipments, industrial products, machinery, wood, or food can be used as cover. In other cases, clandestine maritime routes, speedboats, semi-submersibles, or fishing vessels are used. There are also air routes with improvised strips in remote areas. Every method changes according to police pressure, the country of origin, the destination, and the capacity of the organization. International trafficking reveals a central truth: cocaine is a global economy. It can originate in an impoverished rural area and end up in rich cities thousands of miles away. On the way, it passes through many hands: producers, transporters, intermediaries, wholesale buyers, local distributors, money launderers, and financial networks. Every stage increases the value. What began as a clandestine agricultural chain becomes an international business capable of moving billions. This money needs to be hidden. That is why drug trafficking does not end with the sale of drugs. It continues in the purchase of properties, companies, vehicles, livestock, businesses, bank accounts, cryptocurrencies, construction works, or apparently legitimate businesses. Money laundering allows illegal profits to enter the formal economy. When that occurs, organized crime ceases to be an external force and begins to mix with legal markets, institutions, and business sectors. The human consequences are profound. In production areas, many communities are trapped between poverty and violence. The presence of laboratories and illegal routes can provoke clashes between armed groups, forced displacement, recruitment of young people, threats to social leaders, and the murder of those who denounce. Families live under constant pressure. The illegal economy can bring fast money, but it also destroys the basic security of daily life. In transit zones, the impact is also strong. Countries that do not produce cocaine can become strategic corridors. This generates corruption, port violence, local organized crime, and disputes over routes. In destination cities, consumption feeds distribution networks, street markets, associated crimes, and public health crises. The complete chain connects the impoverished farmer with the urban consumer, the jungle laboratory with the nightclub, the stolen fuel with financial laundering. There is also the damage to health. Cocaine is a stimulant substance with high addictive potential. Its consumption can affect the cardiovascular system, increase the risk of heart attacks, alter blood pressure, cause anxiety, paranoia, insomnia, seizures, and progressive deterioration of mental health. Furthermore, the illegal market offers no guarantees on purity, adulterants, or contamination. Those who consume do not know with certainty what they are entering into their body. Addiction does not affect only the individual. It affects families, bonds, work, personal economy, and communities. It can generate intense psychological dependence, loss of control, indebtedness, impulsive behaviors, and social isolation. In many cases, problematic consumption mixes with depression, anxiety, trauma, or environments of vulnerability. Therefore, any serious look at cocaine must include prevention, treatment, and professional accompaniment, not just criminal prosecution. From a state point of view, combating this economy is difficult because it is not enough to destroy laboratories. If a production point is eliminated but demand, rural poverty, trafficking routes, corruption, and money laundering continue, the chain reorganizes. One laboratory falls and another appears in a different area. One route closes and another opens. One organization loses territory and another tries to occupy it. Illegality adapts. Therefore, the most effective responses usually combine several dimensions: institutional presence in rural areas, real economic alternatives for farmers, control of chemical inputs and fuels, financial intelligence, international cooperation, environmental protection, treatment of addictions, and reduction of demand. The police force can intervene in laboratories, but it cannot solve by itself the conditions that make them profitable. The case of gasoline clearly shows how this economy functions. A legal product, designed to move vehicles and machinery, ends up diverted toward a criminal chain. Its theft or smuggling affects infrastructure, puts communities at risk, and allows for the maintenance of clandestine laboratories. Gasoline is not the moral center of the problem, but it is a decisive logistical piece. Without industrial inputs, large-scale production becomes more difficult. Therefore, controlling these flows is as important as pursuing final shipments. In the end, a clandestine mega-laboratory should not be understood as a technical curiosity, but as a symptom. It is the symptom of abandoned territories, international consumption markets, sophisticated illegal economies, and states struggling to regain control. It is also the symptom of a global contradiction. While one part of the world consumes, another part pays the environmental, social, and human cost of production. Cocaine is not just an illegal substance, it is a complete chain of damages. It begins with a plant converted into a criminal commodity. It continues with gasoline, chemicals, jungle, hidden routes, and improvised laboratories. It advances with corruption, violence, and international trafficking. It ends with consumers who often do not know the complete story of what they have in front of them. Understanding this chain does not serve to reproduce it. It serves to see it clearly, to dismantle its false image of a perfect business, and to recognize that behind every clandestine operation there are destroyed territories, exploited lives, and entire communities forced to live with the consequences.